The sun beat down on the dusty auction yard, turning the air hot and thick. It was a busy day, filled with the sounds of men shouting, animals calling, and the fast talking of the auctioneer up on his wooden stand. Ranchers in wide-brimmed hats stood in a crowd, their eyes sharp as they looked over the horses and cows being sold. Among them was a man named Tom Harding. He was older than most, with a kind face lined from years of working in the sun. He did not have the fancy boots or the newest hat, but he had a calm way about him that the animals seemed to like. One by one, strong, healthy animals were led into the ring. They sold for good money to ranchers who needed good workers. Then, a hush fell over part of the crowd, not out of respect, but out of pity and some mockery. A young mare was pulled into the center. She was painfully thin, her ribs showing clearly under a dull, patchy coat. But the worst part was her leg. It was injured, maybe from a trap or a bad fall, and she could not put her full weight on it. She took a limping, shaky step, and then let her head hang low, as if she was too tired and too sad to even look at the people who were staring at her dot. The auctioneer tried to get things going. He joked about the horse, calling her a project for someone with too much time on their hands. He asked for an opening bid. The crowd just shuffled their feet. Someone in the back snorted a laugh. Nobody wanted a broken animal. It would cost more to feed her and fix her leg than she could ever be worth. Seeing that no one was interested, the auctioneer shrugged, ready to have her taken away. It was then that Tom Harding stepped forward. His voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady in the quiet yard. He said, "I will give $2 for her." For a single second, there was complete silence. Then a wave of laughter erupted. It was not kind laughter. It was loud and mocking. Men slapped their knees and shook their heads. One fellow elbowed his friend and said Tom had finally lost his mind. Another called out that he was wasting his last $2. Tom heard all of it, but his eyes never left the horse. He looked at her not as a broken thing, but as a creature in pain. He walked right through the laughing crowd, ignoring every joke. He pulled 2 worn dollar bills from his pocket and handed them to the surprised auctioneer. Then he walked slowly to the limping mare. He did not pull her rope. Instead, he gently touched her neck and spoke to her in a low, soothing voice. The mare lifted her head just a little, and for the first time that day, her big, brown eyes showed a flicker of something that was not fear. Tom took the lead rope and, patiently matching her slow, limping pace, led his $2 horse away from the noise and out into the quiet. Afternoon got the journey from the noisy auction yard to Tom's ranch was a slow and quiet one. The old truck rattled down a dirt road that seemed to lead away from the rest of the world. In the trailer behind it, the young mare stood unsteadily, bracing herself with every bump and turn. She did not know where she was going, only that the man who had paid for her had a gentle voice. Soon the truck turned down a long driveway marked by a wooden sign that read Hawks Creek Ranch. The ranch was not big or fancy. There was a small, cozy-looking house with a porch, a sturdy red barn, and a few fenced-in pastures where the grass grew green and tall. It was a place of peace, a world away from the dust and laughter of the auction. Tom opened the trailer door very slowly, not wanting to startle his new arrival. He led the limping mare out, his hand a steady comfort on her rope. He showed her the barn, which was clean and smelled of sweet hay and clean wood. He led her to a spacious stall that was already prepared with a deep, soft bed of fresh straw. A bucket of cool, clean water hung waiting for her. The mare, who Tom had already decided to call Daisy, sniffed the air cautiously. Her ears, which had been pinned back in fear, began to twitch forward, curious. This place did not smell of fear or stress. It smelled of safety. The real work began the next day. Tom's kindness was not just soft words, it was action. He knew. Her leg was the biggest problem. Every morning and every evening, he would come to her stall with a bucket of warm water and a soft, clean cloth. He would sit with her, talking in a low, rhythmic voice about the weather or the birds he had seen that day, as he gently cleaned the wounded leg. He was careful and patient, never pulling or rushing. He applied a special smelling ointment that he made himself from herbs and oils to help the healing. At first, Daisy would flinch, unsure of this new touch. But soon she learned that this ritual meant relief. The pain began to fade, replaced by a soothing warmth. A body cannot heal without good food. Tom brought her meals not just of ordinary, but a special mix of oats for strength, and he always had a handful of sweet carrots or a crisp apple as a treat. He would feed them to her by hand, and she would take them with soft lips, her trust in him growing with every bite. Day by day, the sharp outline of her ribs began to disappear, hidden under a new layer of muscle and a coat that was slowly becoming soft and shiny. Her eyes, once dull with exhaustion and hurt, began to brighten. She started to watch for Tom, recognizing the sound of his footsteps long before he reached the barn. Weeks turned into a month. One sunny afternoon, Tom led Daisy out of her stall, into the small paddock next to the barn. He took off her halter and let her be. For a few moments, she just stood there, enjoying the feel of the sun on her back. Then she took a few steps. The bad leg, while still a little stiff, did not give way. She took a few more, moving with more confidence than she had ever shown. She was not running, but she was walking, properly walking, without a terrible limp. She let out a soft snort and shook her head, her mane flying. It was a small moment, but a triumphant one. She was no longer the broken creature from the auction. Under Tom's patient care, she was becoming whole again. She was home, the first. Hard frost of the season silvered the grass at Hawk's Creek, a warning of the brutal weather to come. Tom worked quickly, ensuring the barn was battened down against the coming cold. He stacked extra hay bales against the outer wall and checked the latch on the door twice. Inside her stall, Daisy watched him, her breath making soft clouds in the chilly air. She was sturdy now, her coat grown thick and woolly for winter dot by afternoon. The sky had turned a leaden gray, and a sharp wind began to whip across the fields. What started as flurries soon became a swirling, blinding wall of white. The blizzard had arrived with a vengeance, howling around the little ranch with an eerie force. Tom made one last trip to the barn to give the animals their evening feed. The wind was a physical push against his back. He slid the heavy barn door shut behind him with a solid thud, grateful for the relative quiet and warmth inside. He moved down the line of stalls, patting a flank here, scratching a forehead there. The animals were restless, sensing the storms. Power. He saved a special scoop of oats for Daisy, who nudged his hand gratefully. Satisfied everyone was settled, he turned to leave. He put his shoulder into the big door and pushed. It didn't move. He pushed again, harder. Nothing. The old iron latch, seized by the intense cold, had frozen shut, jamming the mechanism completely. He was trapped. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at him. He was dressed for a quick trip, not for a long night in an unheated barn. The temperature was plummeting. He searched for a tool, anything to pry the latch free, but found nothing in the deepening gloom. He slammed his shoulder against the solid wood again and again until it ached, but the door wouldn't budge. Exhausted and beginning to shiver, uncontrollably, he slid down the door and sat on the cold dirt floor, pulling his thin jacket tight around him. This was how it would end, frozen in his own barn just feet from safety. A soft nicker cut through the sound of the wind. From her stall, Daisy had been watching his frantic struggle. She saw him slump in defeat. With a quiet push, she used her nose to slide the bolt on her own stall door. It swung open with a creak. She ambled slowly over to where Tom sat, her large, warm body blocking some of the draft from under the door. She lowered her head and blew her warm, grassy breath onto his neck and hands. The warmth was a shock. He looked up into her deep, intelligent eyes. He wrapped his arms around her solid neck, burying his cold face in her thick winter coat. Her body heat was a furnace against the chilling cold. She stood perfectly still, a patient breathing shield against the storm. They stayed like that through the long, terrifying night. The wind screamed and the barn timbers groaned, but Tom held on to Daisy, and she stood firm, her steady presence the only thing between him and the freezing dark. She was no longer just a horse he had saved. In the darkness, she had become his savior. The storm broke near dawn, leaving a world of deep, silent white. Weak gray light filtered through the cracks in the barn walls. Tom's limbs were stiff with cold, but the deep warmth from Daisy's side had kept the frost from claiming him. He stirred, his muscles protesting. Daisy shifted her weight, nudging him gently with her nose as if to ask if he was all right. With a great creak and a shower of frost, the barn door finally gave way from the outside. A neighbor, checking in after the storm, pushed it open and stared in astonishment at the scene. Tom, struggling to his feet, and the horse standing protectively over him. The experience in the barn changed everything. Tom looked at Daisy, and no longer saw just a rescued animal. He saw a quiet intelligence, a deep awareness in her eyes that he had been too busy to notice before. He saw the cleverness it had taken for her to open her own stall, the immense courage it had taken to come to his side in the terrifying dark. That afternoon, he didn't just muck out her stall and leave. He brought his old wooden stool and sat. With her, not speaking, just sharing the quiet space. He watched how she listened to the world, her ears swiveling at the call of a bird outside, her head tilting at the sound of the wind in the eaves. He realized she understood far more than he had ever given her credit for. He began to spend hours with her, not training, but communicating. He would hold out a closed hand and ask, "Which one, Daisy?" She would nudge the left hand, and he would open it to reveal a sugar cube. He taught her to lift a hoof on a gentle touch to his knee, to back up at the softest whisper of his voice. She learned with a speed that astonished him, not out of obedience, but as if she was truly thinking, truly trying to understand what he wanted. They developed their own language. A certain look from her meant she was thirsty. A particular nicker meant she heard a car coming down the road long before he could. She began to follow him around the ranch without a halter or a command, a dark, quiet shadow against the green fields. If he stopped, she stopped. If he sat on the fence to think, she would graze in slow circles around him, always keeping him in sight. Their bond was no longer that of a man and his pet. It was a partnership. It was trust woven so tightly it was unbreakable. Tom often found himself talking to her about his day, his worries about the weather, memories of his younger years. She would listen, her ears flicking back and forth, her large brown eyes soft with what seemed like understanding. He would rest his forehead against her neck and tell her she was the best $2 he ever spent. And in the quiet of the barn, with the sun setting outside, it felt like she agreed. Asterisk, the late summer sun was heavy and golden, pouring its honeyed light over Hawks Creek. Tom sat in his favorite worn porch chair, a book open but unread on his lap. His eyes were closed, his breathing slow and even. The week had been long, filled with the hard, satisfying work of bringing in the last of the hay. Now a deep tiredness held him in a gentle grip, and he drifted into a light doze near the porch. Daisy contentedly cropped the sweet clover that grew along the fence line. Her world was the taste of the grass, the warmth of the sun on her back, and the familiar, comforting scent of Tom nearby. The air was still, holding the day's heat like a held breath. A change, subtle but wrong, pierced her contentment. It was a scent, faint but acrid, carried on a stray wisp of air. It was not the clean smell of dust or the dry smell of pine. It was something bitter, something burning. Her head snapped up, her ears pricked forward, rigid and focused not on the fields, but on the house itself. Every muscle in her body went taut. She let out a sharp, piercing whinny, a sound of pure alarm that tore through the afternoon silence. Tom stirred in his sleep, but did not wake. Daisy pawed at the ground, striking the earth with a solid thud. She called out again, this time a high, anxious scream that held none of the softness of her usual greetings. The strange smell grew stronger. Tom's eyes fluttered open, pulled from his nap by the sound of her distress. "Easy, girl," he mumbled, pushing himself up. "What's all the fuss about?" He assumed a fox had startled her or a strange truck was passing on the distant road, but Daisy would not be calm. She refused to look at him. Her entire attention was locked on the corner of the house. She stared with an unnerving intensity, her nostrils flaring wide as she tested the air. She took a few stiff steps toward the house, and then back toward the fence, a clear, restless signal of her agitation. It was this refusal to be soothed, this single-minded focus on something he could not see, that finally broke through his drowsiness. A cold trickle of unease went down his spine. He trusted this animal with his life, and she was screaming that something was wrong. He stood up and walked toward her, following her line of sight. He sniffed the air. At first, there was nothing. Then he caught it, the faintest hint of it. Not wood smoke from a friendly fireplace, but the toxic, plastic smell of an electrical fire. It was coming from the wall. The smell was unmistakable now. A toxic, plastic scent that meant nothing good. Tom's heart hammered against his ribs. He ran to the water pump, his boots kicking up dust. He filled the bucket, the water sloshing over the sides as he sprinted back toward the house. He threw the water against the wall where the smell was strongest. It sizzled against the hot wood, steam rising in a cloud, but the acrid smell only grew stronger, seeping out from behind the siding. A small, almost innocent tendril of gray smoke curled from a crack near an electrical outlet. Then, with a sound like a dry branch snapping, a bright orange flame licked out from behind the wood paneling. It caught the dry timber instantly, racing upward with a terrifying hunger. The fire did not spread, it exploded. The wall became a curtain of flame, the windows cracking from the intense heat. Black, choking smoke billowed out, swallowing the porch. Tom's mind went blank with a primal fear. His father's watch was on the mantel. The deed to the ranch was in a box by his bed. He had to get them. He tried to rush forward, but a wall of heat forced him back, searing his face. A section of the porch roof, consumed from within, groaned and gave way. Burning wood and shingles crashed down, blocking the front door completely. He was trapped outside, and everything he owned was trapped inside. The heat was unbearable. He stumbled back, coughing, his eyes streaming from the smoke. He fell to his knees in the grass, watching his home, his whole life, vanish into the roaring inferno. The sound was a monster's roar. He could only kneel there, helpless, as the flames reached for the sky. From behind him came a sound that cut through the fire's roar. Not a whinny of fear, but a scream of pure determination. He turned. Daisy had broken down the paddock fence. Her eyes were wide, the whites showing, her body lathered in sweat and fear. But she did not hesitate. She did not run from the flames. She ran straight toward them. She lowered her head and drove her powerful shoulder into the already cracked kitchen window. Glass exploded inward, showering the floor inside. The fire reached for her, singeing her mane and flank. She ignored the pain, ignoring every instinct that told her to flee. She pushed through the jagged opening into the smoke-filled kitchen. She found him there, on his knees just outside. She seized the collar of his jacket in her teeth, her grip iron strong. He was a dead weight, overcome by shock and grief. She planted her feet and pulled, dragging him backward across the grass, away from the blistering heat. She did not stop until they were 50 feet away, until the air was clean enough to breathe. She stood over him, her sides heaving, her coat streaked with soot and blood from a dozen small cuts. The barn behind them was beginning to smolder, but they were safe. She had gone through a wall of flame for him. ****. The first light of dawn revealed a scene of utter devastation. And where Tom's home had stood was a blackened, smoldering ruin. Twisted metal and piles of ash were all that remained. The air was thick, with the bitter smell of wet charcoal and loss. Tom sat on an overturned bucket, a rough blanket around his shoulders. He stared at the ashes, his face pale and etched with a deep tiredness. The news had traveled fast. Pickup trucks began rumbling. Down the long driveway, one after another, the ranchers from the auction yard stepped out. The same men who had slapped their knees and laughed at the sight of a broken horse and a foolish man. They did not call out cheerful greetings. They stood in a silent, somber circle, their hats held in their hands. They looked from the ruins of the house to the man on the bucket, and then to the horse standing beside him. Daisy was a sorry sight. Her beautiful coat was matted with soot and dried sweat. A long, shallow cut from the glass marred her shoulder, and the hair on her flank was singed short. But she stood straight and calm, her head close to Tom's, her quiet breathing a steady rhythm in the morning stillness. She was watching the men, her intelligent eyes missing nothing. The man who had laughed the loudest that day at the auction finally found his voice. It was rough with shame. "Tom," he began, his eyes fixed on Daisy. We were wrong. We all were." He swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "We judged that mare on a broken leg. You looked right past that and saw her heart. I've never seen an animal do what she did." A murmur of agreement moved through the group of weathered men. They nodded, their eyes on the ground, unable to look Tom in the face. The end asterisk.